next guest served in Congress, both in the House and as a former U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. He was a candidate for president in 2012 and is running again today in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a nice warm welcome to Senator Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be back here. I remember being here 4 years ago at a forum here, and it's wonderful to be back here in Southern New Hampshire. Thank you, Jeff, for the introduction. I look forward to your questions here in a few minutes. Let me first apologize for my voice. It's not as strong as it normally is. I'm trying to get over a cold, and was just up in Dover, out on the streets in the cold, shaking hands, doing the great New Hampshire thing, so I enjoyed that very much. I want to chat with you about my experience with federalism, and you know, one of the things I talk about in this race is how I differentiate myself with everybody. And the differentiation is, I'm a conservative, and I think most people would vouch for me on that front. But I also am someone who has experience and accomplishments. And that's really a differentiator. There really isn't anybody else in this field who has a record of accomplishment and actually pushing forward conservative principles and ideas and getting them done in Washington, D.C. And the one on federalism, of course, which I'm most proud of, is what we were able to accomplish back in 1996 on welfare reform. If you want to talk about federalism in practice, was an effort by the Republican Congress to accomplish what was promised in the contract with America, to end welfare as we know it. I remind you that when I was in the House of Representatives, I was the ranking member on the Human Resources Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee when I was a House member. And I was responsible for writing the Contract with America welfare reform proposal. When I came to the Senate, I hate to admit that it's sort of the old adage, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And unfortunately, for many, many years, Republicans' sole focus on welfare was cut it, get rid of it. But there wasn't really any energy and focus on how to improve it, to make it work, so people in this country could actually have a system that was a hand up instead of a handout. Well, I knew this issue inside and out, so believe it or not, as a freshman member of Congress, having been there less than a year, I managed the welfare reform bill on the floor of the House of the United States Senate. And we had 4 basic ideas that we stuck to. I know the word compromise has a dirty word in a lot of people's minds today, but compromise is a good thing if it's a good compromise. And I figured out long ago what a good compromise was. A good compromise is doing less of a good thing. That's a good compromise. A bad compromise is getting less of a bad thing. That's a bad compromise. Anytime you're doing something bad, even if you get less of it, it's not a good compromise. Well, when we pushed welfare reform, we had 4 principles that we were going to stand by. Number 1, we were going to do what Bill Clinton said he wanted to do on welfare as we know. What did that mean? End the federal entitlement. End the federal entitlement. Number 2, we were going to block grant it to the states. We're going to give states back control over this area with 2 provisos. 2 provisos. Number 1, there would be a time limit on the welfare payment, and there would be a work requirement. Those were the 4 things we went in and said, for me, were non-negotiables. We could talk about a whole bunch of other things, and we did, because Bill Clinton vetoed this bill twice before we signed it. So we had to make changes. But we never wavered on those 4 principles. And as a result, we block granted welfare. We put a cap on how much money we were going to spend. We gave it to the states with a lot of flexibility, with a requirement that there's a term limit, a time limit, and a work requirement. And what happened? Within the 5 years following welfare reform, poverty levels went to the lowest level ever in America, recorded. The number of people getting off welfare was over 50%. In some states like Wisconsin, it went to 93%. You want to talk about a dramatic change of an experiment in federalism that worked, welfare is the perfect example. Here's the problem. We never followed up. There are all sorts of other welfare programs. The program I talk about, I use the term welfare. It's probably not, it's an inexact term. It was Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC. We ended AFDC, which was cash payments, which were entitlements for mothers who had children who were not married. We changed that to Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, which still exists today. See, temporary assistance. We didn't change anything for food stamps, SNAP. We didn't change anything for housing assistance. We didn't change anything for medical assistance. Any of the other means-tested entitlement programs are all still federally run, federally managed programs. And with this great success, we never did follow up with all of these other programs. And what has happened to all these programs? They've exploded. They've exploded. Food stamps at the highest level, SNAP, whatever, at the highest level ever. Democrats measure success based upon how many people they care for under these programs. We should, of course, measure success of how many people get off these programs and into work and into self-sufficiency. I say this all the time as a very proud author of the Welfare Reform Bill. If the only thing we accomplished was cutting the welfare rolls in half, it would have been a failure. But it was a success because not only did we reduce the welfare rolls, but we reduced poverty and we increased employment. That's success. Because all the goals of our program should be, how do we help the American public do better? Not how do we shrink government. Because in the end, if you shrink government and people don't do better, government isn't going to stay shrunk very long. So it has to be both. And so I share with you a practical, concrete example of, I would argue, the most successful conservative reform, well, I'd say since Ronald Reagan, was accomplished with a Democratic president, Republican Congress. Why I say that is leadership matters, persistence matters, and being able to sit down and compromise. Bill Clinton and I, during that time, if you may recall, we're not getting along very well. There was an impeachment that started to go underway. There were all sorts of things were happening. But you never make it personal. One of the problems we have in Washington, D.C. these days is we have people personally attacking each other. When you do that, you destroy any ability to be able to work together. You know that. You know that in your own lives, in your own business, in your own families. Once it gets personal, it makes it really hard. And we got a bunch of folks, frankly, on both sides of the aisle now, who go personally after members of Congress, personally after, and raise doubts about their intentions and their motives, not just about their policy, but about who they are and what they're about. I will stand up for my record on fighting for conservative things with anybody. But I will tell you, I passed 4 bills. 3 that I remember. At one time I knew it was 4. I can't remember the 4th, but let's say 3 because I remember 3 clearly. One was the Iran sanctions bill. One was that's putting sanctions on the nuclear program of Iran. Back in 2006, I did that. Another one was Syria, putting sanctions on Assad back in 2003. Those 2 I can think of very clearly. And you know who my chief sponsor was? The person who I fought with more than any other member of Congress. The person who I had the most nasty, vicious debates on the floor of the United States Senate. Barbara Boxer. Now you say, you and Barbara Boxer did a bill together? Yeah, and guess what? It passed. Because if Barbara Boxer and I can agree, then everybody in between is pretty easy. So that's what you have to do. For 10 years, I fought with Barbara Boxer on abortion bills. 10 years. Right? I mean, at each other as tough. Go look it up on YouTube if you have any doubts. But guess what? When I reached out to her and said, would you co-sponsor this? She said yes. Why? Because she trusted me. She may not have liked me. She may not have agreed with me on anything else. But she trusted me. Because I always kept my word. And I never made it personal. I never went after. You want to know how a president can change a tone in Washington? You get someone out there who talks about principles and is willing to give credit to a lot of different people. I always give credit to Barbara Boxer for helping me pass that bill. It's the old Reagan adage, amazing things you can get done with if you give other people the credit for it. It's not all about me. It's all about getting this country in the right direction. We have lots of other things we can do. I know education is really important for me. I have 7 kids. And I can tell you that the educational system in this country has gone on a steep decline, in part because of the federal government's involvement in education. When I came to the Congress in 1990, the percentage of the federal investment in education was 2% of all education spending. Now it's 11%. Anybody think the 11% has improved the quality of education in America? Do you think it's given more money to schools to do what is in the best interest of children? No. Why? Because with every dollar comes a string. And with every string comes some elite in Washington or in some think tank telling you how to run your schools. I wrote a book last year called Blue Collar Conservative. I would highly recommend it to you, particularly if you have trouble sleeping. But it's a book that talks about an agenda to reach out to middle America who's struggling. And there's no greater struggle for those who are lower and middle income in America than the frustration of not having their children have the opportunity to get an education so they can rise in America. And the reality is we have school systems across this country that are dedicated not to giving what every child deserves, which is a quality education designed to meet their needs. Now think about that. Can you imagine a president of the United States saying the purpose of an education system is a system that meets the needs of every child as described by their parents? Because, ladies and gentlemen, who is the customer of the education system in America? The parent. Why? Because you are responsible for educating your children. And the school is there to help you. This is the craziest system we have in America. We have a system in America that thinks that they are in charge of the education of your child. They are not. You are in charge of the education of your child. You think the school has to deal with the consequences of your children not getting a proper education? You do. Your family does. Not just through their school years, but for the rest of their lives. Yet you have all the responsibility and virtually none of the power. How does that make sense? How do we as Republicans and conservatives not make this argument? How do we continue to treat education as if it's something that we have to tinker with like every other area of government? When what's necessary is a foundational reform of the way we think about the education system. Here's the biggest problem I've seen, candidly, for Republicans on the federal level. We've tended to nominate and elect governors to presidents. That's all well and good. I know there's a lot of probably people out in this room. Oh, well, we need a governor who knows how to run things. Here's the problem. I found this problem when I came to Washington. When we elect governors as presidents, they become governors of the United States, not presidents of the United States, because they're used to being governors. And when they were governors, look at every single person running for president who's a governor, and what will they talk about? Here's all the things I did on the education system to improve the quality of education in my state. Oh, well and good. Thank you very much. And what do they want to do? They want to bring that to Washington, D.C., and then do it in Washington. That's what the previous president did, Republican president. I guarantee you, if you elect a governor as a Republican, the same thing's going to happen. Because that's what they know. It's a mistake. We need to elect someone who realizes that the role of the federal government is to get out of education and get it back into the hands, not of the state, but of the family and the parents who are involved in raising their children. That's federalism. That's a principle that you heard Pope Francis talk about the other day in front of President Obama. Subsidiarity. Any Catholics here might have heard that term. Subsidiarity. Putting it at the level that is closest to the problem and can best tailor the solutions to meet the needs of the individual who has the problem. Subsidiarity. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what federalism is. And if you're looking for someone who's learned lessons, I heard Carly say the other day at the debate that people swimming in the fish tank don't even know how polluted the fish tank is. She's right. A lot of them don't. But here's the problem. Whoever we elect as president is going to have to swim in that fish tank. And guess what? If you aren't used to swimming in that water, you're going to have a hard time surviving in that water. If you don't know where the sharks are, if you don't know where the danger is, we're going to end up electing someone who's going to go to Washington, D.C., who has no idea how to swim and survive in those waters and thrive and clean up that tank. Because it isn't like any other job you've ever had. It's not like being a governor or a CEO. It's not. It's a very different world. And you better have someone who understands, because if you don't, here's what's going to happen. Let's say I asked this gentleman, I didn't ask him, that I'm Theo Epstein and I hire him as the new manager of the Boston Red Sox. And you can say, well, great. Is Theo still the general manager? Did they fire him? They fired him? Good. Well, maybe they shouldn't have given this year. But let's say we appoint him the manager of the Boston Red Sox. And let's say he knows a little bit about baseball. I mean, he follows baseball. He's a Sox fan, okay. But he's going to go into the clubhouse tomorrow, and what's he going to do? How's he going to manage a team? He's never managed baseball before. He's never been involved in a major league environment. What's he going to do? He's going to have to hire people around him to help him coach the team. That's what everybody in Washington is going to do. If you don't know, if you don't have experience, if you don't know what you're doing, then you're going to have to hire a bunch of people. Look, if they put me as the head of General Motors, I'd take the job. But I'm going to have to hire a lot of people who know about cars because I don't know that much about running a car. If I'm going to run a coal company, I'm going to have to hire really smart people who tell me about, now I know a lot about coal, but I can't run a coal business until I get a lot of smart people around me. But guess who those smart people are in Washington? They're called the establishment. And so you're going to have a whole bunch of people who know Washington. And how do they know Washington? Because, well, they're part of the establishment. And so when the State Department comes to you and you say, well, I want to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Oh, no, you can't do that. No. Don't you realize what will happen? And you have all these really important people at the State Department come to you and tell you how you're going to start World War III if you do it. And so what's going to happen? Well, you're going to go to your experts and they're going to say, oh, yeah, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. The White House is not a place for on-the-job training. You want someone who's going to move federalism? Then maybe hire someone who's done federalism. You want someone who's going to understand the responsibilities of taking on the greatest threat that this country's ever faced? And I believe that right now. Then you better hire someone who knows that threat and has been able to take it on and be successful. That's your challenge. You folks have a big responsibility here in New Hampshire. You get to be the human resource department for the country and interview these candidates and make a decision who's ready to be president, who has the ideas, the experience, and the skills necessary to win and to govern. And here's what I know you folks will do, because you've done it before. You won't listen to the polls. Because I guarantee you, I just wish one pollster would ask this question. when they ask one of these national polls, before they list all the candidates, ask them this. Name all the Republican candidates for president. Just ask that question. Name all the Republican candidates for president. If more than 50% can name 4, I'd be shocked. Yet, that is who the media talks about. You know better. You know better. Don't listen to polling people who aren't paying attention like you are. Pay attention. And you do your job. Because you know what, ladies and gentlemen? This country needs it. This country needs people who are paying attention, who are going to put forth the people who are the right person to govern this country. And that's why I'm here today. I've run before. Every nasty thing that's ever been said or done, you all know. The media's put me out there. They've laid me out there. And you know what? I went on and won 11 states last time around. I ran out of time more than anything else. And so I would just ask you to take a good look and measure what's necessary and who has the vision and the record and who can you trust. I'll close with this. The other day I was with Chuck Grassley in Iowa, and he was introducing me at this event, and he sort of got up and sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit about what to say, and he said, well, let me just say this. I've known Rick Santorum for 20 years, and he hasn't changed a bit. Now, how many folks have you sent to Washington thinking you knew who they were, and you found out they weren't exactly who you thought they were? Ladies and gentlemen, I may not be the flashiest car in the showroom, but you know who I am, and you know what I'll do, and you can trust me. That's a pretty good start. Thank you, and God bless.